The lieutenant laughed when he saw her. A woman with a rifle? In Stalingrad? He said something crude I won't repeat. 10 seconds later, a German machine gunner 300 meters out dropped dead. The lieutenant stopped laughing. This was January 1942, and we were losing. Not just battles, the whole damn war was slipping away. Then this woman appeared, barely 5'4", moved through the ruins like a ghost. Left German squads leaderless, terrified, confused. She didn't fight like us. She fought like someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The Red Army didn't want her. I didn't trust her. Until I watched her work. I was a medical orderly attached to the 54th Rifle Regiment during the siege of Sevastopol. My job was to patch up whoever made it back to the aid station and try not to think too hard about the ones who didn't. When Germany invaded in June of '41, the Southern Front collapsed so fast we barely had time to burn the documents. By August, Odessa was surrounded. 300,000 civilians trapped with maybe 35,000 of us trying to hold the perimeter. We held for 73 days. 73 days of street fighting, cellar to cellar, room to room, every block paid for in blood. Then we evacuated across the Black Sea to Sevastopol, and the whole thing started again. Sevastopol was supposed to be a fortress. Ancient stone walls, Soviet concrete bunkers, artillery positions carved into the cliffs overlooking the harbor. But fortresses don't mean much when you're outnumbered 3-1 and the Luftwaffe owns the sky. Winter came early that year. By November, we were dug into defensive positions across the city, waiting for the Germans to organize their assault. The wind came off the Black Sea like it wanted to kill you personally. Every trench we dug filled with freezing water. At night, you could hear the Germans across no man's land playing Marlene Dietrich on loudspeakers, trying to break our morale. Sometimes it worked. That's when the rumors started. Some woman sniper had come in with the Odessa evacuees. Already had 50-something kills, they said. The men laughed, figured it was propaganda. The political officers loved their hero stories, brave workers defeating fascism, invincible Soviet resolve, all that. But morale was bad. We'd lost too much ground too fast, so if a story about a woman shooter could keep the men from deserting, fine. Nobody believed it was real. Then she showed up at our position. I was assigned to a forward aid station in the industrial district, a half-collapsed warehouse that smelled like oil and blood. The lieutenant, a Georgian named Mikhail, good man, brave as hell, came in one morning with this woman following him. She looked wrong, not because she was a woman, we had female crews everywhere, but because she looked like someone who'd walked off a university campus into hell. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes that made her look 10 years older than she probably was. She wore a quilted Telegraphic jacket with patches on the elbows and a wool cap pulled low. Her rifle was immaculate. Everything else about her looked like it might fall apart. Mikhail didn't know what to do with her. You could see it in his face. He assigned her a spot in the rubble near our flank, figuring she'd either prove herself or get killed quietly, and we'd move on. She didn't argue, didn't explain, just nodded and disappeared into the ruins like she'd done it 1,000 times before. The first time I saw her fire, it was almost by accident. I was carrying bandages to an advanced position when a German patrol started probing our line. 5 men, maybe 6, moving carefully through the wreckage of a bombed apartment block. They had an MG-34 team setting up behind a low wall. I froze. I wasn't a fighter. I was a medic. My job was to not die stupidly. Then I heard the crack of a rifle. Just one shot. The machine gunner dropped. His assistant looked around, confused, trying to figure out where the shot came from. Second shot. He dropped too. The rest of the patrol scattered, dragging their wounded back toward their lines. She didn't move from her position, didn't celebrate, just worked the bolt, ejected the casing, and waited. When I got back to the aid station, I asked Mikhail about her. He just shrugged. She's been doing that since Odessa. 2, 3 kills a day, sometimes more. The Germans haven't figured out where she is yet. But there was something else. The men started to avoid her. Not openly. Nobody wanted to look cowardly. But you could see it. They wouldn't sit near her during meals, wouldn't ask her questions. It wasn't because she was a woman. It was because she didn't act like the rest of us. We joked, we complained, we talked about home, about food, about anything except the war. She didn't. She cleaned her rifle, she slept when she could, and when the shooting started, she went to work. I think they were afraid she'd get them killed, or worse, that she'd outlive them. It was mid-January when everything changed. Maybe the 15th or 16th. I'd stopped tracking dates by then. The Germans launched a major push toward the harbor. They needed the port. If they took it, the evacuation would stop, and we'd be trapped. We heard them coming before we saw them, the grinding of tank treads on frozen mud, the shouts of German officers organizing their squads. And then the shelling started. I was in the aid station when the building next to us took a direct hit. The blast threw me against the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. My ears rang. Dust and smoke everywhere, thick enough to choke on. I could hear men screaming, not the sharp screams of surprise, but the long, exhausted screams of people who knew they were dying and couldn't do anything about it. Mikhail came in, blood running down his face from a shrapnel cut above his eye. "We're pulling back," he said. His voice sounded far away through the ringing in my ears. "Germans are in the factory. We can't hold." "What about the wounded?" I looked at the men lying on the floor, 3 of them, maybe 4, too wounded to walk. "Leave them. We don't have time." I felt sick, but I understood. If we stayed, we all died. If we left them, maybe the Germans would take them prisoner. Maybe. Probably not. That's when she walked in. She looked at the men on the floor for a long moment. Then she looked at Mikhail. "How many Germans?" "2 squads, maybe more. They've got a half-track." She nodded, checked her ammunition pouch. "Give me 10 minutes. Mikhail started to argue, but she was already gone, slipping through a hole in the wall, moving toward the factory complex like smoke. I don't know what possessed me, but I followed her. Maybe because I didn't want to leave the wounded. Maybe because I was tired of running. Maybe because I wanted to see if the stories were true. I grabbed my medical bag and went after her through the gap in the wall. The factory was a maze of collapsed machinery and broken walls. You could hear the Germans moving through it. Boots on metal, equipment rattling, voices calling out positions in that sharp, efficient way they had. She moved through it like she'd memorized the layout in the dark. Found a vantage point on the 2nd floor, a gap in the wall that gave her a view of the main floor below. I crouched behind her, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to think about what would happen if they found us. The Germans came in confident. Why wouldn't they? They'd been winning for months. A squad of 10, maybe 12, with a junior officer leading them. They were clearing rooms, checking corners, moving toward our aid station with the methodical efficiency of men who'd done this before. She waited until they were clustered near a broken conveyor belt. Then she fired. The officer went down. Before his men could react, she'd worked the bolt and fired again. Another man dropped. The rest scattered, shouting, trying to find cover, trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. But there was nowhere to go. The factory floor was open, exposed. She didn't rush. That's what I remember most. She was calm, methodical, like she was working a problem, not killing people. Breathe, aim, fire, bolt, eject, reload. Each movement precise, economical, no wasted motion. One of the Germans spotted our position, started firing an MP-40 at the wall. Bullets tore through the bricks, showering us with dust and fragments. I pressed myself flat against the floor, certain we were dead. She didn't flinch, just shifted slightly, found him through the scope, and put a round through his chest. He went down, still firing, the submachine gun chattering until it ran empty. It took maybe 3 minutes, felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, 7 Germans were dead or dying on the factory floor. The rest had retreated back toward their lines, leaving their wounded behind. The half-track sat abandoned, its crew gone. She stood up, calm as anything, and walked back toward the aid station. I followed numb, my legs shaking so bad I could barely keep up. When we got there, Mikhail was staring at her like she'd just walked through a wall. 10 minutes, she said. We can move the wounded now. We carried them out under cover of the smoke from the shelling. By the time the Germans regrouped and came back, we were gone. 4 men who should have died made it to the evacuation point. I don't know if they survived after that. Probably not. But they had a chance. After that, the men stopped avoiding her. They started asking her for advice. Where to position, how to spot movement, how to stay still when every instinct told you to run. She didn't talk much, but when she did, they listened. I think they realized she wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just trying to survive. And if keeping her alive meant they might survive too, they'd do it. The German offensive stalled for 2 days, not because of her. One sniper doesn't stop a division, but because every delay mattered. Every hour we held was another hour for the ships to evacuate civilians, another hour for reinforcements to arrive that never came, another hour closer to spring when the mud would slow the German tanks. She kept working. By the end of January, her count was over 200. The political officers loved it. They brought photographers, tried to get her to smile for propaganda photos. She hated it, told them to leave her alone. Eventually they did. I remember watching one of those sessions. The photographer kept asking her to hold her rifle a certain way, to look heroic. She just stared at him until he stopped talking. Then she went back to cleaning her weapon. In April, the Germans launched their final assault. We'd held for 5 months, longer than anyone thought possible, but we were out of ammunition, out of food, out of men. The evacuation order came through. Anyone who could walk was to make it to the docks. Anyone who couldn't, well, nobody said it, but we all knew. She was wounded during the withdrawal. Mortar fragment caught her in the face. I was there when they brought her in. Blood everywhere, left side of her face torn up bad. I thought she'd lose the eye. Somehow, she didn't. I packed the wound as best I could, gave her morphine she didn't want, and helped get her to the submarine dock. They evacuated her on one of the last submarines out of Sevastopol. I stayed, ended up in a German POW camp until '44, but that's another story. I heard about her later, after the war, when the stories started coming out. She'd been sent on a propaganda tour to America and Britain, met Eleanor Roosevelt, raised money for the war effort, then came back and trained new snipers for the rest of the war. Final count: 309 confirmed kills, most of any female sniper in history. They made her a hero of the Soviet Union. Put her face on stamps. Most of the men I served with in Sevastopol didn't make it out. Mikhail died in the final days, shot while covering a retreat. There was this kid in our platoon, Petya, farm boy, who talked about his mother's cabbage soup like it was holy scripture. He survived, surprisingly, lost his leg but made it home. I saw him once after the war. He didn't want to talk about it. Neither did I. The city fell in July 1942. The Germans held it until May 1944, when the Red Army finally broke through and took it back. By then, it was ruins on top of ruins. Nothing left but ghosts and spent shells. I don't know what happened to her after the war. Heard she went back to university, finished her degree, became a historian, if you can believe that. Someone who spent 2 years killing people spent the next 40 writing about it. I wonder if that helped. I wonder if anything could. Sometimes I think about her when it snows. Not because of the cold. We were all cold all the time, cold down to the marrow, but because that's the weather I remember her in. Snow and smoke and the smell of burned wood. I think about the way she moved through those ruins, patient and careful, like she had all the time in the world, even though we both knew she didn't. I think about the men she saved by doing what nobody else was willing to do. There's this thing nobody tells you about war. It doesn't end when the shooting stops. You carry it in the way you sleep, in the way you react to loud noises, in the way you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there why you're still angry or sad or just tired all the way through. She carried it too, I'm sure of that. 309 times she looked through a scope and made a decision nobody should have to make. 309 times she pulled a trigger and someone stopped breathing. You don't walk away from that unchanged. Nobody does. But here's the thing, she did it anyway. Not because she wanted to, not because she thought it would make her famous, because someone had to. Because if she didn't, the men she was protecting would die. The civilians hiding in the catacombs would die. The city would fall faster. So she did it. I think about that when I hear people talk about heroes. They always want the story to be clean. Brave soldier does brave thing. Everyone cheers. The end. But it wasn't clean. It was cold and ugly and terrifying, and most of the people who were there didn't survive to tell anyone about it. But she did, and maybe that's enough. The lieutenant who laughed at her that first day in the schoolhouse outside Sevastopol didn't make it out. Most of the men who mocked her, who thought a woman with a rifle was a joke, they didn't make it either. But she did, not because she was lucky, because she was better. I hope she found some peace after. God knows she earned it. I hope she slept well, dreamed of something besides snow and ruins and the weight of that rifle. I hope she got to be just a person again, instead of a weapon pointed at the enemy. I never saw her after Sevastopol, never got the chance to thank her for those men she saved, for buying us time we shouldn't have had. But I remember, and as long as I'm alive, someone remembers what she did in that frozen city by the sea, when the whole world was burning and nobody thought we could hold. She held. We all did, for a little while longer